Good morning, boys and girls. Um, Chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching. Now here I have found some help from the 17th century, a Zen master. And this Zen master has his own commentary on the Tao Te Ching. There are many such commentaries. And I thought I'd read this first paragraph because I think it's very useful for people who are beginning or people who are struggling with this very dense and beautiful work. Takuan, the Zen master, says, Lao Tzu's book is not like reading ordinary books. One should not get so caught up and bogged down in literal meanings. In some places, the book represents analogies derived right from Lao Tzu's basic intent. In some places, it starts from analogy and works its way back to basic intent. So there is something difficult to grasp about what he is saying, like a dream, like a shadow. Just when you think you found the basic idea, it is a metaphor. And when you think it's a metaphor, it's the basic idea. So this is beautiful working between the first and the second attentions in the Nagual, in the tradition of Nagualismo, or the Toltec tradition. So it's not like reading ordinary books. One should not get caught up and bogged down in literal meanings. In some places, the book presents analogies derived from intent. In some places, it starts from analogies and works its way back to intents. So he says this. So if there is something difficult to grasp about what he is saying, like a dream, like a shadow, just when you think you found the basic idea, it's a metaphor. And when you think it's a metaphor, it's a basic idea. Okay, so that's the spirit. And we'll start with chapter 1, A Way Can Be a Guide. First, I'll read through the whole thing, and then we'll go through each line. This first chapter, by the way, is just loaded with, this first chapter kind of has the entire Taoist pathway within it. In these few lines, you get the whole overview of the way. Now, what I just said can't be true, but there's a lot of truth to it. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1, A Way Can Be a Guide. A way can be a guide, but not a fixed path. Names can be given, but not permanent labels. Nonbeing is called the beginning of heaven and earth. Being is called the mother of all things. Always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. Ever intent, thereby observe the apparent. These two come from the same source, but differ in name. Both are considered mysteries. The mystery of mysteries is the gateway of marvels. So, as in all, and many, or not all, but many of Cleary's books that are difficult, there are notes in the back that are very, very helpful. And I'm going to refer to those in various orders depending on the situation. So he doesn't speak of the first two lines, which is fine. A way can be a guide, but not a fixed path. The truth of this is obvious to anyone who's traveled this journey. People come from many different backgrounds. They have many different inclinations. They have many different sets of conditioning. They have different starting points in terms of the metaphors that they have in their mind. They have different resources. There are different times and different ages. And every one of those considerations and many, many more are absolutely essential when you're trying to help someone along the way or if you're trying to help yourself along the way. So a way can be a guide, but not a fixed path. So what it's also pointing towards is the fact that a religion or a dharma study that is too fixed, too formulaic, too rigid, and too encrusted from use is not the way. The way is much more fluid than that. The way is much more like nature, like wind. Wind can move along in a direction, but not on a fixed path unless you deliberately try to manipulate it. So in all things in this world, one must ask, well, is this a rigid doctrine or dogma or procedure? Will that work here? And maybe sometimes for smaller things it might. But in art, for example, let's use art for example, or use science for that matter. A way can be a guide, but not a fixed path. There's not a fixed path to artistic greatness or to scientific discovery. So, and I've barely scratched the surface of how true this is. And any serious student or any serious teacher knows that this is true. The minute you try and put it into a fixed formula, you've taken away most of its power when it comes to meaningful things of the human, artistic, scientific, or creative spirit. So that's line one. The second line is basically the Buddhist path of emptiness. Names can be given, but not permanent labels. Names can be given, but not permanent labels, which is another reason why you can't have a fixed path, by the way. So in Buddhism, much emphasis is put on the fact that nothing exists inherently. And when they say emptiness, one of the things they mean is empty of inherent existence. All things are made up of other things, as are all phenomena. And when you examine that closely in contemplation, you begin to realize that everything is empty of inherent existence. So something may exist for a while in our minds, but it's subject to change with time, or it's subject to change with closer examination. And it's such a huge topic, Buddhist emptiness, that we can't really cover it here, but suffice it to say that we can give names and labels to things, but those names and labels can be switched around without changing the inherent the actual object of observation or study or inquiry. We can use Pluto, the planet Pluto, as an example. Pluto was once named a planet. It's no longer named a planet. It has nothing to do with Pluto. I mean, nothing to do with the rock floating in the sky, right? Or floating around the earth. So all things are like that. Democracy, communism. We can give them names, but they're not permanent. They can't be permanent. Nothing is permanent on this earth, this beautiful earth. Okay. So, a way can be a guide, but not a fixed path. Names can be given, but not permanent labels. Nonbeing is called the beginning of heaven and earth. Being is called the mother of all things. So it goes straight to the jugular, to the heart of the matter. Non-being is called the beginning of heaven and earth. Being is called the mother of all things. So, in his notes, he says, Thomas Cleary, our enlightened translator, says, non-being, or the nameless, stands for passionless, uncontrived, formless awareness. Okay? Non-being, or the nameless, so once again, names can be given but not permanent labels. Non-being, or the nameless, stands for passionless, uncontrived, formless awareness. Being, or the named, stands for discursive intellectual activity. So he's contrasting two things. He's contrasting non-being and being. Now, non-being is another word for God. It's another word for the Nagual. It's another word for Brahma. It's another word for Buddha. Buddha is used also. Buddha is one of those words where you can use it in many different contexts and it means something else. So if you say Buddha, you could talk about this universe as Buddha, or you could be talking about the historical Buddha, or you could be talking about Buddha mind. And you just have to become familiar with it. It's not uncommon in language for that to happen. So, non-being, the Nagual, the Buddha, God, is called the beginning of heaven and earth. Because, of course, God is we can call God the constant. The constant is passionless, uncontrived, formless awareness. The constant is consciousness, or foundational consciousness. Without the unnamed, nothing would be here. Consciousness is that out of which everything arises. Everything arises from God. Everything returns to God, or to the Nagual, or to Brahma, or whomever you'd like. Okay, so non-being, which is the formless, constant awareness, passionless, uncontrived, is called the beginning of heaven and earth. Being is called the mother of all things. Now, from being, we get the 10,000 things, a myriad of things. And let's see what he says here in the notes. Being, or the name, stands for discursive intellectual activity. So there's two minds. And the Toltecs put this beautifully. There's the right side, and then there's the left side. The right side, and I'm not referring to hemispheric dominance here. The right side is your logical, discursive, word-based, intellectual, concrete, language-based intellect. The left side is dreaming, is creative, is formless, sees the whole picture, is much more free. And so we have the first attention and we have the second attention in the Toltec vocabulary. And this is a fascinating thing to observe, is that the second attention of the Toltecs is the attention that's used by the Tantric Buddhists in the visualization of their deities, and among many, many, many other practices they do to cultivate the second attention. We can go way afield with just that, because the difference between the discursive and the formless is huge. The difference between the objects we can name in the world, this is a stick, this is a pen, this is a head, that all belongs to the tonal. That all belongs. All the words and names belong to the right side of awareness, which is kind of fascinating because it's also the left hemisphere, which fits up with the science exactly. And then the nameless, the unformed, the non-intellectual, non-discursive, creative sides, creative and free, and Jung's cultural archetypes, or Freud's, whatever you want to call those things, or anyone, just that's where poetry comes from. And so we need both sides here. And this is one of the messages of the Tao Ching, is that you need both being and non-being. You need both intellect and the formless awareness, the free, formless, nameless consciousness. But all of that, even what I've just said, is inadequate, because what I described was an aspect of the human mind, and what they're referring to in the book is an aspect of reality, the substrate, the creative, active substrate, the one that creates the world, creates us, and is the root of our consciousness. And so what all these Dharma practices are trying to do is to get you back to that constant, trying to get you back to that substrate, to God, to truth, with a capital T, to love with a capital L. That's the whole point. Because once you've tasted that, you'll never taste, your life is transformed, your attention is transfixed, and you cannot, although you cannot describe it to anyone else, there's nothing more that you would want to have for yourself or others than living in that sublime realm. And even sublime doesn't do it justice. The Buddhists call it the path beyond bliss. Okay. So along those lines, we have the next, let's see, 1, 2, 3, about the fifth line. Always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. Ever intent, thereby observe the apparent. Okay, again, this is basic praxis in Taoism, Buddhism, even Catholicism, Zen, name it, and if you can name it, but it's going to have these elements. Always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. So if we're full of passion, if we're full of like vim and vigor and drive and we're going to get this thing done and so on and so forth, we cannot see the subtle. If we're angry, we can't see the subtle. If we're anxious, we can't see the subtle. If we're confused, we can't see the subtle. If we're consumed with lust, we can't see the subtle. Too much effort is counterproductive because you can't see the subtle nuance of formless awareness. And so it says, always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. I never know which way to look with this thing, so forgive me if I'm looking in all kinds of squirrely directions. So always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. Ever intent, observe the apparent. Now, and if you want to see what's in front of you, you have to pay attention. You have to have you have to have some intent to see what's right in front of you. If you want to hear that bell, you got to be listening. That's a bad example. If you want to see something, you have to intend to see it. You have to have intent. So what it's doing is juxtaposing these two means of knowing. I mean, if you want to study this book, you have to be intent, right? But if you want to put this book into practice, you have to be passionless. It's hard because in our culture we value passion so much, and people, intermediate Dharma students, know better than that. That passion is very useful, especially in the beginning. But after that, it has to be directed, it has to be corralled, it has to be focused, or what it does is it just blocks the subtle. And so the subtleties, for example, in mathematics or in art or in poetry or in philosophy, those will all be lost if you're all wrapped up in some emotion. So another way to put this would be emotion. Always emotionless, thereby observe the subtle. Ever intent, ever paying attention, thereby observe the apparent. So you need both, because you need to see the apparent, what's in front of you, or you're going to get run over by a bus. And you also need to be quiet enough, emotionless enough, passionless enough to observe the subtle nuance, because the essence of consciousness is rarefied, it's refined, it's finer than it's the whole world, it's the whole universe and more, but it's so subtle. And if your mind is preoccupied with other objects, like, oh man, I gotta quit this class, or oh man, I really want to watch something else, or I'm too busy to be doing this. Your mind is rolling around and all this other stuff. I was going to say garbage, but I wanted to be kind. Then you block it. You block the nuance, and this happens all the time. And some people do this their whole life. They only live in the first attention, and they have no hope. And of course, those same people can't appreciate poetry, they can't appreciate art. They may have a sense of humor, but it's only kind of one kind of sense of humor. They can't observe or enjoy truly, deeply nature. So we need both the first and the second attention. We need passionlessness, and we need intent or attention in this context. Now, we could go on on this particular thing right here for a very, very long time, profitably. But we're going to try and get through what we can, and so I'm going to move on. But let's look at Clary's notes on this. Okay, so with regard to lines 3 and 4, non-being is called the beginning of heaven and earth. Being is called the mother of things. We're going back up, okay? This passage is also read, the nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of all things. So now we see how rich this thing is. So instead of saying non-being is called the beginning of heaven and earth, we say the nameless, which is another word for the constant, another word for God, another word for the Nagwal, another word for truth, another word for Brahma. And consciousness with a big C is another word for the nameless, the nameless. So going back to the first few lines, we see that there's a completely different and deeper way to read those. Okay, now here's Clary. Non-being or the nameless stands for passionless, uncontrived, formless awareness. Being or the named stands for discursive intellectual activity. Is that clear? Non-being or the nameless stands for passionless, uncontrived, formless awareness, or the constant, or God, or truth with a capital T, or love with a capital L, or the Nagwal, and so on and so forth. Being or the name stands for discursive intellectual activity. What we're doing here is discursive intellectual activity, pretty much. But again, it's a finger pointing towards the moon. So now we make it to line 5. This stuff is very, very pregnant with meanings, and there's not just one. There's almost an infinite number, depending on where you are. And so this book, you can read it in your 20s, you could read it in your teens, you could read it in your 20s, you could read it in your 30s, you could read it in the 40s, 50s, and so on and so forth. And depending on your level of development, you're reading a separate book, because these things have, and that's why you don't want to get caught up in interpretations from American poets, for example, or you don't want to get caught up in mistranslation by German philosophers, another example, because you miss the beauty of the actual work. You wouldn't accept that with any book that you really cared about. Okay, lines 5 and 6. Always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. Again, without passion, if you're without passion, then you can observe the subtle, the nuance, the unformed, the uncontrived. And this theme of uncontrived is going to run through this whole text. Contrivance is really overrated. We'll talk about that later. Ever intent, thereby observe the subtle. And so here he's a translator, and he's just pointing out, this version of the Tao Te Ching was the only one to survive the Mongols in the 13th century. There are others, and I'm reading from another one. This is, let's see, where is it? This is the 17th century Zen master, Taquan Soho, right? And so there is more than one iteration of this magnificent text. But I strongly recommend you settle down with one, and I suggested it be this one, the Essential Tao, 80 pages. I've been doing this since I was in my 20s. No, a little bit before my 20s is when I started. Okay. Okay. Always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. Ever intent, thereby observe the apparent. This passage is also read, quote, eternal non-being is needed to observe the subtle. Eternal being is needed to observe the manifest. Well, I can see why he read it. He translated it the way he did, but let's look at another way to read it. Eternal non-being is needed to observe the subtle. So eternal non-being is another word for the constant, for God, for truth, for the Tao, the Nagual. And yes, eternal non-being is needed to observe the subtle. Yeah, you need consciousness. You need the substrate itself to observe the subtle. And God, or the Tao, or the Nagual, or Brahma is the substrate. Eternal being is needed to observe the manifest. So that's true too. In order for us to even see this world, we have to be born into this world. I know that sounds obvious, but we take everything for granted. We take many things for granted in our lives, and we take our existence for granted. We'll see how that goes. but the point is that you need eternal being to observe the manifest being, which is formed and can be named, and although the names are always going to change. And then Cleary goes on. These lines are one of the keys to Taoist praxis. Chen Wan, an adept of the complete reality school, complete reality is a major school of Chinese Taoism and then Buddhism. Okay, here we go. Both passion and intent mean focusing the mind on things. The subtle is the essential. It also means the most extremely rarefied. The subtle is the essential. Essential means the essence, the consciousness, the substrate. The subtle is the essential. It also means most extremely rarefied. The evident is an edge of reality. So this is an edge of reality. If we followed this stick all the way, it would take us to, I don't want to confuse you, but it would take you all the way to the constant. If you really drilled down, and let's say we were materialist scientists, and we drilled down to the atoms, and then the subatomic particles, and then the space, and then just the electrical waves. I don't know so much about particles these days. I think waves is a better way to describe it. But then we get to the space between the waves, and now we're into the realm of God, because there's nothing there. And that's another frame on emptiness, nothingness. That's not what it is, because on this world, emptiness is everything. All of this is emptiness. This is empty of inherent existence. This is empty of inherent existence. I'm empty of inherent existence. I'm like a mirage speaking to you, or a dream figure. And when we recognize that truth of our existence, then we're much freer, because we realize the thing is a play of consciousness, that without consciousness there is nothing. And what exists without consciousness? All right. The evident is an edge of reality, like a little pathway by a major road. So this is incredible. So let's see if I can illustrate this. So if we take a human lifetime and what it's observed with its eyes and its ears and its thoughts and its mind, it's like a little ping pong ball, max. And then that's in the first attention. This is how many books you can read, how many courses you can take, how many TV shows you can watch, how many news items you can experience in a lifetime. It's not even a ping pong ball. It's like a marble. That's the first attention. The second attention would be the size of the largest stadium that you've ever seen. So you have this little ping pong ball or a little marble in a huge stadium. And that huge stadium would be the second attention. And then outside the stadium, you have the universe. And now we're talking about the third attention. And this stuff will become more apparent as we go along. But so we unnecessarily restrict ourselves to such a small, puny, little, meager existence, right? And just in the realm of the known, as Krishnamurti puts it. We're just living in what we know. We're just living in what we can verify, what we can consensually like decide, well, this is true and this is false. Well, good luck with that too, right? It doesn't work. The world doesn't work that way. And we can see it around us. It doesn't work. Okay. The evident is an edge of reality, like a little pathway by a major road. Tiny little pathway by a major road. So the evident is like a tiny little pathway. But the real is the size of the universe. Larger than the universe. Larger than all the multiverses. If those, it's funny, the 2nd century Sufis wrote a gorgeous Buddhist text called the Avatamsaka Sutra. And in it, they describe the multiverse all over the place. And they describe how it, in a way, I won't get into that now. It's just it's all too beautiful. Oh boy. The word also means return, what comes back to you as a result of intentions. We won't get into that now. The empty selfless Tao is immutable. So it is said to have no intention, yet it becomes pregnant with myriad beings, so it is said to have passion. So this is, I'll just read it to you. The empty, selfless Tao is immutable, so it is said to have no intention, yet it becomes pregnant with the myriad beings, the 10,000 things, the trees and the birds and the flowers and the stick. All of these come from the fact that without intention, the Tao, the way, truth itself, consciousness itself, God, Brahma, so on and so forth, produce the myriad things, the myriad beings. So it is said to have passion, because it wouldn't do this unless it wanted to. God wouldn't create this world unless he wanted or she wanted to. And so we have to say, well, there was something there, right? Because we're here. Okay, going back to this, the notes. To observe the subtle with constant dispassion means to keep the attention on emptiness. To observe the evident with constant intent means to sustain certain thoughts. Constancy means real constancy, the great way, of which dispassion and intent are adaptive functions. God, this is guys. Okay, so here we go. To observe the subtle with constant dispassion means to keep the attention on emptiness. Start there. If you have constant dispassion, you can, that's what's required for the second attention. That's what's required for understanding emptiness. And that's the first step. And for modern seekers who have availability of books and YouTubes and everything else, I don't see that there's any excuse not to understand emptiness. It's as important as any, as gravity or, geography. It's just basic education. Emptiness means that nothing exists inherently on its own. Everything is provisional. In many different ways. It's provisional spatially, it's provisionally in terms of our intellects, it's provisional in terms of its duration in time, it's provisional in the sense that if there's no one there to observe it, it doesn't exist at all. I don't want to get into that debate, but if we weren't here to observe the world, this human world would not exist. Now, that's pretty obvious, is it not? There might be another world. There might be the world of the crocodile or the eagle or the butterfly, but the human world would not exist. So in that manner, we say that things exist, but not in the way we imagine that they exist. Emptiness doesn't say that there's nothing there. It says there's nothing there in the way that we imagine it. This is a dream world. Okay, to observe the subtle with constant dispassion means to keep the attention on emptiness, on the nature of the world we live in, this dream world. To observe the evident with constant intent means to sustain certain thoughts, right? So we have to like sustain the thought. I'm going to use a crude example of let's say $100 bill. In order for a $100 bill to exist and be observed, we have to keep thinking that it's a $100 bill. If all of us were to stop thinking that it was a $100 bill, we'd have a beautiful piece of green paper, and God knows what it'd be used for, but it wouldn't be used the way it is used now. So individually and collectively, we sustain certain things with our intention and our thoughts. There are many such things. For example, let's use the Sufis. The Sufi is a name that was applied to a group of people who were extremely enlightened and concerned about helping those who would come after, and they benefited also from them who came before them. So they're like a current in humanity. And so at one time they were Buddhists, at one time they became Muslims and Christians and God knows what else, right? Because the name is not the thing. And so, but the notion of Sufi, we keep that thing in existence with our thought. And in the future, there may be a totally different name. Who knows? Maybe there'll be some major war within or outside of Islam in the current epoch. And then we'll drop that name, which is basically, I think, a German word that was applied not that long ago. But no matter what the name is, the reality is still there. I hope that's making sense. You can have a reality without having the name. And you can have the name without the reality, right? I hope that makes sense. I'm going to see if I can come up with an example. See, I was thinking of patriotism. There can be people who really believe in the welfare of their country without the word patriotism. And there can be the word patriotism without people who really believe in the welfare of their country. Does that make sense? So the name is neither here nor there. The reality is someone or a group of people that believe in the welfare of their country. But even country is a provisional. I mean, country used to mean, the country of Mexico used to include California, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and go all the way up to Wyoming. That was the country. Well, that's not the country anymore. And Texas, I should add. That's not the country at all. And when we say the country of Mexico, we wouldn't even think of that. But what changed in that western part of the United States? Nothing changed but the label. Okay, I digress a little bit. But so you see that we maintain these things with our thoughts. And what this work is about is setting your mind free, and free to move from the first attention to the second attention. And then you start to realize the limits of the first attention. You start to realize the limits of the concrete, delimited, definitionally derived object world, objectified world. And you start to see that there's another world, a much richer world, frankly, a larger world of the second attention. And there things are much more fluid, and that's the realm of free-flowing metaphor, of dream, of science, of creativity, of poetry, of great art, and of spiritual advancement. So it must be cultivated. And it can be cultivated to a great degree. And for example, the Tibetan Buddhists and the Mexican Toltecs are masters at this. Okay, constancy means real constancy. Okay, to observe the subtle with constant dispassion means to keep the attention on emptiness. To observe the evident with constant intent means to sustain certain thoughts. Constancy means real constancy, the great way of which dispassion and intent are adaptive functions. So basically the right side and the left side. Now no one's trying to throw out the right side. We need it. We need to build bridges. We need to be able to discourse with each other. Sorry. We need to be able to discuss with each other. We need the right side, but we also need the left side. We need dispassion and intent. We need both. With dispassion, we observe the subtle. And with intent, we can communicate, we can read, and we can study, and we can progress. We need both. They're like two legs. We need them as humans. Ultimately, we don't need the body, but that's later. Okay, we go to lines 7 and 8. Those two come from the same source but differ in name. Both are considered mysteries. Okay, I'm just going to read Cleary here. The above mentioned two aspects of awareness, formless intuition, which is another word, formless intuition is another word for the way, the great way. Formless intuition and the above mentioned two aspects of awareness, formless intuition and discursive intellect, both derive from an even profounder source. So the second attention and the first attention both come from a more profound source. And we know what that is, right? Both kinds of awareness are unfathomable mysteries, if for no other reason than that they themselves are the means by which we access our experiences of them. Okay, they're mysteries because we assess, for example, we assess the right side using the right side, which what's his name? Gödel, the mathematician, says you can't study a system with something without going outside the system. But yet that's exactly what we're trying to do, so we're left with a huge mystery, or something like that, for the mathematicians listening. Or the incompleteness theorem. Is that the incompleteness theorem? I'm not a mathematician, but there's something that says that, you know, if you're trying to study something and you're using something within the set, you're never going to be able to do it because you're still going around in the circle of the set. I hope that makes sense. So you have to get outside of it in order to look at it objectively. Okay. Both kinds of awareness are unfathomable mysteries, if for no other reason that they are themselves the means by which we access our experiences of them. And it is for the same reason that their source is by its own nature an even greater mystery. So we know that there's a source for both our right side and our left side, for both the first attention and the second attention, and for the 10,000 things, or the 100,000 things, or 100 trillion things, right? We know that there's a source for that. And that source is even deeper than all this. So now we're going to something much deeper, an even deeper mystery. And so, so let's go back to the text real quick. We're running out of time. Okay. Always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. Ever intent, thereby observe the apparent. These two come from the same source but differ in name, right? Both are considered mysteries. The mystery of mysteries is the gateway of marvels. Okay. And this is what, by the way, what's meant by you have to grow alongside this text, and this text will help you grow. But let's see what Cleary says. The mystery of mysteries is the gateway of marvels. In terms of the mystic psychology of Taoism, according to the Complete Reality School, this refers to the so-called mysterious pass, or the central switch post or opening between rational and intuitive modes of awareness, described in the earlier passage as intentional observation of the apparent and dispassionate observation of the subtle. Taoist practice involves opening the mysterious pass to allow the mind to work in both modes without interference. Okay, so they see what I mean. This thing is an entire Dharma way, method. So this sentence, the mystery of mysteries is the gateway of marvels, can be read many, many ways. And as you progress, it will be read many, many ways. But so we have a mystery, which is, well, where does the right side come from? I mean, we have these theories, and they're beautiful, and they're kind of funny because they keep changing. I'm an old man, so I've seen these models change in my lifetime, sometimes several times. And now we have beautiful models. But we had beautiful models when we had the neuronal model of intelligence. But now we're talking about collective intelligence, and we can computationally and theoretically we can visualize the way that the thing has to work in order to seek information and compare it to what it's got, and how it tries to minimize uncertainty. And this is the free energy principle for the neurobiology folks out there. At any rate, it's still a mystery, because whatever it is, it's just a model. And then we go to the intuitive side. That's even more a mystery. Why do we dream? We don't even know why we dream. Well, I have some ideas why we dream, and we'll talk about it some other time maybe. But the whole intuitive, creative, we don't know what creativity is really. I mean, it's not, creativity is not putting two things together and saying, oh, look, I made a T, or oh, I made a pyramid. Putting things together is not creativity. Creativity is creating, and we have no idea how that's done. We have literally no idea. So also on the right side, we have language, which is left hemisphere. So I'm confused, so right side, left hemisphere. We have language, and we don't know where language comes from. And we might be able to figure it out. The animals will help us, along with the computers and the AIs. They'll probably sort some of that out. But at the moment, we have no idea where we come from. We have no idea where language comes from. We have no idea where creativity comes from. So, anyway, so the mystery of mysteries is Gateway of Marble. So we have the mysteries on the right side. We have mysteries on the left side. Both of these come from the same source, which is the Tao, the Nagual, God, the Allah, the nameless, or the one with 1,000 names, or Brahma. We can go on and on forever, pretty much, trying to approximate this substrate that's outside the stadium, way, way, way outside the stadium, to the edges of the known universe and further. And however many universes there are, all of that would be included too, because it's a substrate, and human beings can access it. And once you access it, your life will never be the same. It will be infinitely better, richer. Just, there's nothing else to do with this life that's worth doing. I mean, you can do things like go to Mars, maybe. I mean, those are things you can do, but sooner or later you're going to get old, and you're going to wonder why you were here and what it's really about. You might feel good about what you did in the manifest world, and that's good. We need that. I'm not trying to put it down, but I'm saying that even the most accomplished women and men in the universe, in our planet, eventually come back down to the question of, well, wait a minute, what am I? Where am I from, and where am I going? And so that's the spirit of these magnificent texts that have been handed down to us, preserved, thank God. It could have been wiped out with the rest of the canon. Okay, we're going to stop there. That's chapter 1. We'll see how this goes. It helps if people, do something to say that they've seen it or that they like it, maybe if they do. And if they don't, you can say that too. But then I just get some feedback as to whether or not this is just going out into the ethers. But meanwhile, both the salutation and the warning stand. Keep the faith and guard your mind. Take care. Thanks for listening.